I was watching this kerfuffle. I call it a kerfuffle that took place between China and Japan. Japan apparently comes out and says something to the effect of that they would intervene if China goes for reunification of Taiwan, and they would like militarily intervene. Now, when this was positioned to Trump, effectively saying, "Hey, Trump, this is what the Japanese prime minister has just said." Trump gave a weird statement where he said something to the effect of, "A lot of our allies are not friends either." Apparently, aiming that at Japan, which is wild to me, right? Because the Japanese foreign minister was jumping around on stage with Donald Trump, like, "This is my great friend, this is my great buddy, our alliances, et cetera, et cetera." And Trump, because Laura Ingraham, he was on the Laura Ingraham interview, and Laura Ingraham asked him something about, "Well, hey, is it China? Like, China's not a friend of ours, right?" And she was talking in the context of Japanese prime minister. And he was like, "A lot of our allies are not our friends either." And says, basically, a lot of these countries have taken advantage of us more than China. What did Japan expect from this? Obviously, this is a sore spot.
So first of all, what the Japanese prime minister has done is quite similar to what happened a few weeks back at EU. When I talk about EU Parliament, a portion of EU Parliament, this group of parliamentarians, so-called IPAC, the Interparliamentarian Alliance on China, which is co-sponsored by none other than Marco Rubio, invited quote-unquote vice president of Taiwan to speak in the Brussels. I mean, at that time, I said they're stepping on the reddest of red line on China. Now, but in EU's case, they can still claim plausible deniability. They could claim, "Oh, it's just some crazy, we have all kind of politicians in our parliament. It's just some of our parliament have this idea, but it does not represent the all of EU." They can still say something like that. But for Japan, this is very unambiguous. This is spoken by Japanese prime minister, who just recently took office, by the way. And you can't say there's no plausible deniability about this. This is very clear. She said, if China is going to, send its warship into the Taiwan Strait, that is an existential issue for Japan that will necessitate our military involvement. Now, this is very triggering for China. So first of all, when it comes to Taiwan, for China and Chinese people, this is a very emotional issue. I mean, to make an analogy, this is Ukraine is an emotional issue for Russia and many Russian people. In very similar vein, Taiwan is very emotional issue for the Chinese people. And if you just add Japan to that mix, that's a tinderbox, because the whole reason, there's a separation status between Taiwan and China. The first time that happened was under Japanese occupation when, after the first Sino-Japanese War of 1894, 1895, China was forced to give up Taiwan to the Empire of Japan, and then Taiwan became a Japanese colony for 50 years. After World War II, Japan was forced to give Taiwan back to China. So given that history, and now a Japanese prime minister saying that, they're going to send the Japanese military to Taiwan Strait. If the war, there's a famous Taiwan influencer called Jim Boss. He commented on this. He said, well, if the possibility of war is around 0.2%, when you add in Japan, suddenly the possibility became 8,500%. and when there's this whole idea of that, the existential issue for Japan is obviously bogus, because Japan, she had to say that to justify getting around Japan's peace constitution. Article 9 of Japan's peace constitution says Japan should not maintain a military and should only maintain a self-defense force that defends Japan. but ever since like the U.S. when U.S. start realizing that it alone cannot contain China, it had encouraged right-wing Japanese politicians to essentially scrap that peace constitution. That this got a major push under Shinzo Abe. This is why Shinzo Abe is a big favorite of many right-wing in America or in the West, because Shinzo Abe gave a big push to justify, if our allies involved in wars around Japan, then we, as our allies, we're obligated to send aid. But it's still that he didn't say. He's talking about like a support role, maybe Japan for the U.S. military, but he did not say like we are gonna straight up send Japanese military into Taiwan. So first of all, China considered Taiwan part of China, so this is an internal matter for China. And for Japan, given all that bad history and bad blood, dating to World War II, and come out and say we are going to militarily intervene in Taiwan against China. By saying that, by militarily intervene if such scenario arise, Japan will make it an existential issue for Japan, because like I say, China, because it's an emotional issue for China, you cannot expect China to stay rational when it comes to the issue of Taiwan. China can stay rational on many, many issues. But when you cross that red line on Japan, you're on the path toward war with China. Yeah, that's 100% guaranteed. China has said many, many times over and over and again, right, that Taiwan independence or any push for Taiwan independence is a red line. We're gonna go to war, and if Japan or U.S. decide to intervene militarily, that's World War III. It's gonna be on. I mean, like, and no matter, people will say, what about the cost? Would Japan, China trade Beijing for Taipei or for Tokyo? Look, you need to understand, this is an emotional issue. When it's an emotional issue, all that calculus, rationality, throw out the window. It's going to be war, okay? It's going to be war. Nukes will be flying. So people should just calm the fuck down and say, why do we need to escalate to that scenario, right? I mean, like, Taiwan is none of your business, and especially for Japan with their own colonial baggage, it's like you should stay the f out. And U.S. has pursued the so-called strategic ambiguity toward Taiwan for a long time, which means they will neither confirm nor deny that U.S. will come to the aid of Taiwan in the case of war. They have been very carefully maintained that strategic ambiguity until very recently, until like when Joe Biden was asked, would U.S. defend Taiwan? And Joe Biden says, yes, we would defend Taiwan. But even in that case, there is still a plausible deniability because it's freaking Biden. Now, nobody takes what Biden says seriously. And so, the White House did come out and slow walk back Biden's statement afterwards. But this is a very non-senile Japanese prime minister speaking about this. There's no plausible deniability about this. Yeah. And they are breaking the strategic ambiguity that even U.S. is very careful to tread. I mean, that from that you can kind of see why Trump will make a statement like, not all our allies are our
Trump
friends.
Was like, hey man, not all these people are our buddies. That statement is hilarious because Laura Ingraham seemed to be shocked by it, right? Laura Ingraham was like, well, China's not our friend, right? It was like, hey, not all our allies are our friends either. And you're like, what, who? And just to be very clear on this, to back your point up, Chinese ambassador to Japan, what is it, Wu Jinghao, I believe, posted on X in both Japanese and Chinese, saying Taiwan is a separate part of China and how they resolve Taiwan question is a matter for the Chinese people themselves to decide. Quote, the idea that Taiwan contingency is a contingency for Japan attempts to drag Japan onto a chariot to divide China, which will ultimately lead Japan to a wrong path of no return, unquote.
People need to understand something. When it comes to the issue of Japan, the Chinese government is a pacifist compared to most of the Chinese population. Okay, because
Really?
like most of the Chinese population want to resettle the score of the first and the second Sino-Japanese War. You know, like they still have that memory. We Chinese people have a long memory, man. This is what Japan is afraid of. Japan is constantly, especially the right-wing Japanese politicians, they're constantly scared that China will do to them what their grandpa did in China back in World War II. This is what this is about. And at some level, you know what? A lot of Chinese population would like to see that happen. And if you freaking intervene in Japan, in Taiwan, that is a cause for war. And this is, there are many reasons why the Japanese Prime Minister said what she said, because the Japanese right-wing politician. Okay, when I say when we're talking about Japanese politicians post-war, we're really talking about who is more right-wing. You know, they're mostly all right-wing, but right now they have been going further and further to the right. You know, this started with Shinzo, even before Shinzo Abe, but Shinzo Abe was really pushing the envelope, trying to kind of make the Article 9 of the Peace Constitution obsolete. And now the new Japanese Prime Minister is basically saying, yeah, we're going to send our worship, our military outside of Japan because we think that could be an existential issue for us, which is completely bogus. How is she's talking about maybe a Chinese naval blockade of Taiwan would be an existential issue from Japan, which is bogus.
Yeah, nonsense.
Japan is not getting its energy from Taiwan. You know, like this is not an existential issue for Japan at all. But I think I think there's two possibilities that could be going on. One possibility is there is a collusion between the right-wing Japanese politicians who want to get rid of the peace constitution, because they want to, quote unquote, be a normal country so they can have a full-fledged military again. And then the push from Washington, who wanted their ally Japan and South Korea to take on more of a burden to come from China. Because we mentioned on your show many times, the U.S. Navy have a serious problem of lagging behind the shipbuilding capability. China has 200 times the shipbuilding capability than U.S. So right now, the U.S. Navy is already trying to offshore some of the work of retrofitting warship in Korea and Japan. And they also, because they do realize if they want to fight China in China's neighborhood, they have to cross the tyranny of distance of the entire Pacific. So they must make sure Japan and South Korea will stay involved. So U.S. can use their bases, in Okinawa, in Japan, to get inside a fight over the Taiwan scenario. But it's very interesting because United States, even up to this point, is still very careful. They kind of skirt around the red line, but they try not to overstep it. But then you have all these U.S. vassals, like you saw what happened with the EU parliamentarian, and now with the Japanese prime minister, that's kind of openly flaunting China's red line. I think it served a couple purposes. One purpose, of course, to bind those vassal states of the United States even tighter onto the U.S. war wagon, and sabotage their own relationship with China. Two, this so does United States doesn't have to come out and straight and say it, and because this is our allies. Trump can always disavow this action of their allies, right? And you're like, oh, they're not really our friends.
Like, that chick's crazy. Yeah, I don't have anything to do with that. Right. Yeah, that's wild. They have to know that's a red line. They have to know the history associated with it. I guess I compare it to, let's say, the history in the United States, for example. Among like slavery, civil rights, those type of things, and how some of those things are hot button issues, like even today, like you're talking about like 60, 70 years on. And so you can imagine, or even Germany, right? Germany seems to want to settle the score for getting their ass kicked in the last World War. Like, meaning this stuff lingers. It doesn't just go away when the wars stop, per se. No, it's wild. That comment is just kind of outlandish. Of course, Taiwanese DPP endorses. How do you pronounce her name? Takachi's statement. China has urged them to retract that statement. I don't necessarily know if Japan is going to retract the statement or not. But either way, that's a bad look for Japan, especially given the history between Japan and China. Very bad.
I think Japan, because Japan itself is also facing a lot of issues, economic issues. Part of it is because, Japan has a lot of competitive edge of Japan got neutered by the United States since the 1980s Plazas Accord. And, U.S. actually back then took a sledgehammer to the Japanese semiconductor industry, which back then were world leading. And so now Japan's economy is not doing well. Its population is shrinking. So the politicians might thought, okay, well, we can always try war. We can always try to boost our military industrial complex, right? To shore up our flagging economy, the way that Hitler did, before World War II. Let's just inject all the money into the military industrial complex to produce weapons. That will provide more employment. Of course, that will only be temporary. It's not sustainable, unless you go to war. So I mean, that's the path they're on right now, because they can't just deal with the fact that now there's a rising China next door, which for the last couple hundred years, Japan has kind of looked down upon, as like this old decadent East that they have left behind to embrace the Western model, right? I mean, Japan that literally had a slogan called "Leaving Asia, Joining Europe," right?
Really?
For them, it's
Did they?
Yes. Yeah, it's like joining civilization, right? Joining the civilization of the West, and by abandoning like the old linkage with old Asia, which is represented foremost by China. So right now they are not happy with the whole balance shift toward China, and so they're going down with that ship. They're gonna they're gonna go try to die on the hill of the whole Japan superiority, but we're gonna have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I assume that they thought the United States would back them up on this. That the U.S. would be like, "Hey, we're going to back Taiwan, or we're going to back Japan." Meaning, I get the sense that they're getting this kind of signal, either implicit or explicit, from the U.S. And the U.S. at the very least, Trump was like, "Yeah, dude, no, we've just had a trade war. We're not trying to escalate. We're calling this a day for the time being," and left her out hanging. So
there could be another reason, is because they also saw which wind the wind is blowing. They saw the Pentagon paper leak, whereas U.S. says we're going to deprioritize containing China. We're gonna pivot to Latin America to lay the kibosh on Venezuela, and then Japan will be like, whoa, wait a minute, what about us? You can't leave us hanging here.
Interesting.
You don't forget about us, right? So because for ironically for the Japanese right wing, they made like Japan-US security pact like the cornerstone of their policy. So for US to kind of leave the Western Pacific, that will be like, oh, we're gonna be left alone to face the wrath of China. No. We're gonna have to make a scene to make sure you stay involved, right? And this will further validate why Trump said what Trump said. It's like, dude, that bitch is crazy, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. That puts you. It's like Europe, for example, where Europe is like, "Hey man, we'll take the 15% tariffs. We'll buy $700 billion of energy. We'll buy $700 billion of weapons. Don't leave us, daddy." Like, meaning doing everything in their power to keep the United States involved in Europe and in NATO. And it sounds like you're saying Japan is doing something very similar of like, "Hey, we're going to make a scene to try to keep the United States involved in Asia. We don't like this idea of you pivoting away from Asia. We want you to stay here. You're a cornerstone of our defense." That's interesting. I guess I never thought of it in those terms, but I guess you may not be wrong on that. I mean, that could be why. And to be honest, it could be both, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was only a few months ago where Hegseth was like, hey, are you guys willing to die for the dignity of America? And Australia and some of the other countries are like,
yeah.
Can you reframe that? Can you say that in a different way? Yeah, so maybe it could be a few of those things, right? But where she believes that her relationship with the U.S. is closer than what it is, not realizing we could take or leave any of these people. Like, it's not, it just wasn't our interest.
They have to realize they're not Israel. Okay, they're not Israelis, so everybody have to take a back seat. I'm sorry, Israelis they're the golden boy, right? They will always take priority over all of you. Like, so, Japanese, Taiwan, you guys are just peons. You're like pawns. Israelis, okay, that they need to be protected because they're golden child.